Do you stream on a Roku, a Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app. Watch Action News live.
And the big story on Action News.
Plus special programming, breaking news, and severe weather updates.
Tremendous amounts of rain.
Always on. Always the news team you trust. Watch 6ABC 24/7 on your streaming device. Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
And welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the Labor and Energy Show with J-Doc and Krausey. We welcome all of our viewers and all of our listeners tuning in. J-Doc, another great show lined up for us. And, you know, sometimes I think the audience will question me when I say great show, but I've got to commend you on our guest lineup every week. Has been fantastic. And the information that is being provided to our viewers and to our listeners across the Jacob Network here on the Labor and Energy Show is really spectacular.
Yeah, and Joe, I appreciate that. Shout out to Brendan Williams of PBF Energy for being a big part of the guests we bring on the program. It's interesting that you say that, you know, a lot of, you know, so we have a mixture. We have on the East Coast guests, and today we have an awesome show. We were able to spotlight the top labor and energy leaders in the country, and so today's going to be a show with guests that are, you know, their issues are broad. It's a national show. We have Ryan Sistad, Executive Director, Better in Our Backyard. That's the name of the organization. Awesome organization. And then we're going to have Pete Holran, Director, Government Relations, U.S. at Enbridge Energy. So lots to talk. And before we do, though, Joe, we have, you know, you mentioned obviously the great guests we've had, and with our Energy Education and Awareness Board, you know, we also have great energy and labor guests. And I want to make an announcement. Okay, certainly, you know, so our board is growing. Our board of directors is growing, and certainly this is no exception. It's a big one, and we're really ecstatic to welcome Chet Thompson, President and CEO of American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, AFPM, onto the Energy Education and Awareness Council. That's our board of directors of Advocacy United. And, you know, as President and CEO of AFPM, Chet leads a staff that advocates for petroleum refiners and petrochemical manufacturers before Congress and the executive branch on a broad range of public issues. Chet, we're so ecstatic. He gave us a quote. I want to read the quote because it's really relevant, and we're ecstatic to have him on the board. And he was on the broadcast at least a couple times. Jobs in our industry, the products that we make, and the energy security we deliver in our communities and throughout the United States are all worth protecting. AFPM is proud to join the board of the Energy Education and Awareness Initiative. With California's ban on gasoline and diesel vehicles, and by extension, American-made liquid fuels becoming the template for President Biden's EPA and other states, this initiative is needed now more than ever. Our policymakers, especially those who represent refinery and petrochemical workers and facilities, need to know what our industries provide and what's at stake. Chet Thompson, President and CEO, American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers. Our entire Energy Education Awareness Council welcomes Chet to the board, and we're ecstatic to have him.
Yeah, and no doubt about that. And as we move through the month of August and then get ready to transition in on the other side of Labor Day, we've got a great fall / end of fourth quarter 23 campaign where we are going to stay true to our belief that we can change the narrative through education, and we're going to do that.
Listen, I couldn't be more fortunate, and you as well, Joe, to have the who's who in energy and labor on our broadcasts. We had the Boilermaker Special. That's a major energy sector union, and the one team that's, you know, it's common sense and energy, and the fact that we need to work. We got renewables coming into the market, lots of great stuff, but we need to work together for the benefit of our nation and the world, and as Chet Thompson said, our communities. To protect our energy security and obviously to impact the environment, because the one thing that's a common denominator with our labor and energy leaders is everybody is passionate about the environment and doing everything we can to make it a carbon-free environment and doing it the right way.
We'll get started on the Labor and Energy Show with J-Doc and Krausey. One reminder for all of our listeners and all of our viewers on today's program, if you miss any of the program, you can download the podcast of the program on Apple or Spotify. Just search the Labor and Energy Show. We'll get started on the other side of the break. This is the Labor and Energy Show with J-Doc and Krausey. Back in a moment.
Is the best vacation one that you find or one you get lost in? One that takes you to new heights or reminds you to go with the flow? To get your feet wet and your wheels spinning? One that lets you find your own rhythm or get carried away? Find the best of yourself. Get lost in the woods. Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Do you stream on a Roku, a Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app. Watch Action News live,
And the big story on Action News.
plus special programming, breaking news, and severe weather updates.
Tremendous amounts of rain.
Always on, always the news team you trust. Watch 6ABC 24/7 on your streaming device. Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Labor and Energy Show with J-Doc and Krausey on the Jacob Media Network. We've got a great show. I'm ecstatic to bring into the program Ryan Sistad, Executive Director at Better in Our Backyard. Ryan, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you for having me.
Love the American flag right behind you, my friend.
Oh, appreciate that. Yeah, no, thank you.
Our pleasure. And Ryan, if you would, okay. So we spend a lot of time talking about the energy needs and the opportunities on the East Coast, as well as around the country. Like I mentioned in our intro, today we're going to spend some time on energy projects and policies impacting our Midwestern American energy and jobs. Okay. If you would introduce yourself and your organization to our listeners. And certainly Better in, I mentioned to you earlier, Better in Our Backyard. What a great name for an organization. Talk to our listeners.
Yeah, so thank you, Joe. My name is Ryan Sistad. I'm the Executive Director of Better in Our Backyard, and our mission is to promote responsible industrial development both in northern Minnesota and throughout the upper Midwest. And the name was actually came up from a colleague of mine here in Duluth, Minnesota, after she gave an impassioned speech to the local city council in Duluth over a proposed copper nickel mining project in northeastern Minnesota. So Better in Our Backyard was founded roughly 5 or 6 years ago, and it was founded by basically some young professionals in the area that wanted to promote responsible industrial development in northeastern Minnesota and some of the projects that are happening here. And since then, we've evolved. We've grown into Michigan and Wisconsin, and we're still continuing to grow our following each and every day. So we started out as a company that was mainly, or an organization that was advocating for proposed mining projects in northeastern Minnesota. Now we also do work for some companies in the oil and gas sector.
And so having said that, and you have a great mixture of, in a lot of sense, like we said at the beginning of the show, like our board of directors with the Energy Education and Awareness Initiative, labor and energy leadership. And so there's a lot of synergy there. Let's start with the pipeline projects, okay? Enbridge will be on later to talk about the latest with the Line 5. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. But you guys also supported the replacement of a pipeline called Line 3. Can you provide some background on that project and why was it necessary and talk about the jobs it provided, if you will?
Yeah, well, first of all, it was a replacement project. So it was basically replacing an old existing degrading pipeline. And it's a pipeline that runs from Edmonton, Alberta, all the way to Superior, Wisconsin. And it's Minnesota's most studied pipeline project in Minnesota's history. I believe it was in the permitting process for just over 6 years. And during that time, during the construction of Line 3, which took a little bit longer, a little bit over a year, there was over $5 billion in new spending. And between over a 6-year period between 2017 and 2023, on average, there was roughly 4,500 individuals or professionals that were positively impacted with jobs during that time frame. And at its peak in construction, it supplemented nearly 15,000 jobs from my understanding. So it was a huge economic benefit to northern Minnesota. And you look at some of the communities. I was born in one of them, Fosston, Minnesota. When you have $5 billion of new spending going throughout northern Minnesota and through rural communities, that has a huge impact. So a lot of local small businesses and obviously mini crafts and the union building trades really benefited from the project. And at the same token too, we have a brand new pipeline that's providing the safest way to transport crude oil for everyday energy needs. And
so having said that, a replacement project is basically an upgrade,
yes,
for our listeners, of an existing pipeline, okay, to make it safer, to make it more efficient, for the process and the communities. And so you experienced some opposition. Before we get into that, though, you talked about the permitting process.
Yeah.
Can you touch on that? Because it's to get these projects off the ground, okay, can be extremely time consuming. Touch on that if you would.
Well, it's for any project, whether we're talking about a pipeline project or a mining project, or ironically, a clean energy project. Permitting processes are taking way too long. There's no clear standards or guidelines in place. And so, for example, one of the issues that we're running into in northeastern Minnesota, and this is an issue, especially in the mining industry across the country, is that there's a proposed copper nickel mining project called the North Met project in northeastern Minnesota. It's been in the permitting process for over 18 years. So we have a generation of kids that have grown up learning about a mining project that they've never even seen a shovel put in the ground. You look at another mining project in Idaho, Perpetual Resources proposed Stibnite Gold project. I believe they've been in the permitting process for over 10 years now. But then when you look to our allies like Australia or Canada, when they're permitting a new mine, on average, it takes them roughly 3 to 5 years. Well, if we're negotiating, or if the current administration is negotiating trade deals for their critical minerals or metals that are valuable to battery metal supply chains, then obviously you think their permitting standards are good enough. So let's modernize our permitting process today. And I think we're starting to see a little bit more support from the administration on that subject. And I think what's bringing both sides together, because obviously historically permitting reform has been a Republican talking point, but now we're seeing more on the other side of the aisle starting to understand that we do need permitting reform, because the clean energy projects that they're trying to get through aren't getting permitted either.
Right, and with the debt ceiling bill, there was some permitting reform
yes.
in that, and so obviously we're hoping to make we're hoping to make some progress there. It hasn't worked so far. Okay, they've been able to shut projects down, still, and so must be very that process must discourage a lot of energy companies from even getting involved in some projects.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's we're seeing it in Minnesota, and we're seeing it in other parts of the country where I would argue that this permitting process isn't promoting good business in the states. And when you talk about the debt ceiling bill and other bills, one thing I always like to mention too is, senators like Joe Manchin have been very consistent on this issue, and I would argue he's been nothing short of a stud in trying to get good permitting reform inserted in those bills.
And so, having said that, you experienced some opposition on the Line 3 project. Where did that come from?
Well, and I think this is pretty common in every state, but we're seeing a lot of urban versus rural communities, if you will. I don't want to say versus as if there's a competition or any resentment, but oftentimes when you see these opposition groups, they're funded by communities in urban areas. Like, so here in Minnesota, we have the Twin Cities, we got Duluth, Rochester, Mankato. that are more populated areas. And oftentimes that's where the money's coming from these opposition groups. And, and then you have rural communities that understand the benefits of what these projects mean to the communities and to their families. And so what we've noticed is that a lot of times these reps are from urban areas or even from outside the country. I mean, when Line 3 was going through the permitting process, Jane Fonda from California was coming out talking about why, we don't need the pipeline, how we need to transition to green energy technologies. But, as we were talking about earlier and some of the points that you made earlier, that's not going to happen overnight. If we're going to get to a net zero carbon economy.
And that's the whole point. In other words, you get these people coming from out of state. We all care about the environment, obviously. Okay. And we understand that the community should have a say. No, nobody's trying to push that away or anything like that. But real, education and awareness on realities and working together with our traditional energy resources and our renewables. And you get, those, by the way, with PES refinery here in Philly, okay, they were coming from out of state also. We had a very safe situation, okay. I mean, the priority was safety, okay, and emissions and everything. And the noise was coming from outside our communities. They shut the damn thing down, okay. Now we're importing the same products, from out of the country now that we were creating here with a great job base, great economy, all those things. And it puts you in the twilight zone. And so being able to educate people on those details is so vital, okay? Because people come down and they just talk about, we can just shut the switch, turn the switch off and go right to renewables. We can't do it. And not only can't we do it, 5,000 products we use every day are comprised of fossil fuels and affiliated products. So having said that, and we preach.
Well, to add to your point, the refinery is probably making those products cleaner anyway than from.
Exactly. I mean, our standards here in the United States that we hold to our energy sector far exceed those of those overseas, and so we we're going to talk about this for until we get the narrative changed and impacted. Regular folks like myself and a lot of the union people and their families and neighborhood people, they don't get these details. They just think that we're the big bad wolf and we just care about jobs. We care about jobs, the environment, and the entire process. Having said that, okay, that project, the Line 3 project, is now complete. From an advocacy perspective, what are some of the lessons that were learned from that project in terms of actions your organization and other organizations took to secure the public and policymakers' support needed to get across the goal line?
Well, from my end, it was both us. It was both an organization called Minnesotans for Line 3 and another one called Better in Our Backyard. And then we had another group called Jobs for Minnesotans in the area that helped support the project. And one thing that and all of us worked well in tandem, but one thing I think there's always room for is better education, more consistent messaging. I know when we were promoting the Line 3 replacement project, I try to make sure that we had 3 or 4 pieces of content going out each and every week for the project, so it stayed consistent in folks' minds on what this project would mean for communities, but then also statistical benefits. So if Line 3 doesn't come through, how many rail cars are going to be used instead of pipelines, or how many trucks do we have to use to ship that crude oil from Edmonton to Superior, Wisconsin, and is that safer for the environment? So those type of things. So to answer your question, to keep it short, is I think there's always room for improvement on the educational aspect.
And I'm assuming a lot of communication with the community, and obviously Q&As and tutorials that made the community comfortable. I certainly it's fascinating to me that process. You guys are supporting some mining projects, specifically 2 that are in Minnesota. Talk about those projects. What are they? What minerals would they produce, and what are those minerals used for?
Well, the 2 key projects is New Range Copper Nickels North Bend project, formerly known as Polymet, and then Twin Metals Minnesota out of Ely. And both of them are targeting copper and nickel, and Twin is a little bit bigger than the NorthMed project. So like the NorthMed project, for example, once that's up and running, it will supplement nearly 1,000 jobs when you include the spinoff aspect of it per year. And then Twin Metals Minnesota would be roughly 2,200 jobs per year that be created. And the average mining wage in Minnesota pays in excess of $90,000 a year. And the minerals that they would be targeting is copper, nickel, cobalt, and platinum group metals, both of the projects, because both of them reside in what we call the Duluth Complex, which is located in northeastern Minnesota. And the Duluth Complex, it's estimated to hold roughly a third of the U.S. copper reserves, 88% of our cobalt reserves. However, that number is starting to go down a little bit as they discover more cobalt in other states like Idaho, for example, and 95% of U.S. nickel reserves. And the other 5% of U.S. nickel reserves is actually currently being mined by Michigan's Eagle Mine in the UP of Michigan. So once they run out of ore, which is estimated to happen around 2027, 2028, Minnesota is literally the nation's last stand in terms of having significant nickel resources. And when you think of nickel, think of EV batteries. When you think of copper, think of wind turbines. And historically, too, what's interesting about some of these projects is that they're located on what Minnesota calls the Iron Range. And we've been mining iron ore for over 140 years. And iron ore is essential in our steel making. And so to add to that, we still even hold 90%, of U.S. iron ore reserves. So we have a really rich mining history, and we're looking to add into our portfolio, if you will, by having copper nickel mining in the area with Twin Metals and New Range Copper Nickel.
Now, if we weren't doing that here in the United States, where would we be importing these products from?
A lot of it, especially on the cobalt issue, is coming from China. So right now, it's estimated that the Democratic Republic of Congo holds roughly 76% or actually produces 76% of the world's supply of cobalt, but the refining capacity is within China. So if we're going to get our cobalt, and cobalt is needed in our EV batteries, we would have to buy it from China. So when we talk about increasing cobalt production in the U.S., we only have one operating cobalt mine, which is Idaho Cobalt Operations out of Idaho. We still have to talk about the refining part of it too. So it's a two-pronged approach. We need to increase our refining capacity of cobalt here in the U.S., but we also need to bring more domestic mining operations of cobalt here in the U.S. as well. Now,
having said that, the emissions process and the environment doesn't just hover over the United States, right? I mean, it's our whole planet. Okay.
Yes.
Let's talk about our standards compared to the Congo. And I'm sure you've seen Siddharth Kara's video of the child labor, mining there and what's going on over there in the Congo, where the kids are mining for the cobalt and the critical minerals needed for the EV batteries, our computers, our phones and all those things. Talk about the standards that we maintain here in the United States.
Well, for one, we wouldn't have any child labor issues in the U.S. and that obviously, and then also too, we argue that our environmental standards are the best in the world. And in northeastern Minnesota specifically, we're somewhat, I don't want to call it a bubble, but Twin Metals and New Range Copper Nickel both have PLA agreements to build their mines, which a PLA, as you know, Joe, means that it's going to be utilizing all union labor to construct the mine. So not only
project labor agreements for people who don't know what a PLA is. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. And they're quite common in northeastern Minnesota, which is a good thing. We argue that we have some of the best workforce in the country. But to add to that, I mean, it's, like the respect to the worker and worker rights is second to none in this area as well. And I would argue across the country, obviously, especially when you compare us to Congo.
Yeah, we were fortunate enough to have Siddharth on this program, and we went through that whole process. I was personally wondering how those minerals get into the United States and through middlemen type of companies. Okay, it's ridiculous, no question about it. Let's look at when we talk about those types of situations. Okay, and it's important for individuals to know that we don't run out of the need for them. Those products are products that we use every day, and talk about what we deal with in regards to those mining projects and the commitment we have here in the United States, particularly in Minnesota, on those mining projects in regards to safety, job safety, worker safety, and, like you mentioned, the environmental standards compared to overseas?
Well, I can't really comment specifically on what they're doing overseas in terms of their safety standards, but I think anytime you have a company agree to a PLA agreement, I would argue that a lot of times it's union building trades that really set the standard for job site safety. So I think right there is kind of a really good, I would say, preview of what what the company standard is, if you will, for safety on site. And then also too, like whether, or even with Enbridge or in other companies that we work with, you walk on a job site and they say, X number of days since our last safety incident. I don't know if you're getting that in third world countries. So I think, whenever you walk into a company and they have that sign up on construction and they're making sure you're wearing your hard hat, they're making sure you're wearing your protection for eyewear and for your hands, I think really just shows right there what the standard is for safety. And especially when you walk on a job site that is in the middle of construction and the floors are swept off and they're clean, just those little things that are becoming more and more relevant today. And
let me just, make this very clear. And in this, we're leaving some stuff on the table here, but anybody who doesn't understand, just because somebody opposes a project in the United States doesn't mean we don't need these minerals. Okay, talk about what happens if we shut ourselves down, Ryan, and what the United States has to do if we were to shut down two projects like that that are obviously very efficient products. In both an environmental process, in regards to environmentally and in worker efficiency.
Well, it's three negative things. Number one, we're increasing our reliance on countries that don't like us, so adversarial nations like China and Russia. And then two, if we're not reliant on them, then we're probably going to be reliant on countries like Indonesia or cobalt for, say, nickel in Indonesia or cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo that don't have the same labor or environmental standards as we do. As you mentioned before, we live in a global environment. So how does that help the global environment? And the third thing is too, I'd argue, is that, I think it's good to have trade with Canada and Australia, but if we become increasingly more reliant on them, then we're just exporting our jobs to their countries and our wealth to their countries. So, to me, it's just kind of a lose-lose proposition. And so I would argue that we need to put our focus on strengthening mineral supply chains here at home and creating energy dominance again in the oil and gas sector, and then looking to our allies to strengthen critical mineral supply chains or battery metal supply chains.
Common sense and energy. Ryan Sisted, Executive Director at Better in Our Backyard. I want to thank you so much for joining us. Can't wait. We just the tip of the iceberg. Can't wait to have you on the broadcast again. Also, I'm going to be going to your hairdresser. We'll get on a call after the show. We appreciate your time, my friend.
I appreciate it, Joe. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Our pleasure. More after the break.
Is the best vacation one that you find, or one you get lost in? One that takes you to new heights, or reminds you to go with the flow? To get your feet wet and your wheels spinning? One that lets you find your own rhythm, or get carried away? Find the best of yourself. Get lost in the woods. Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Do you stream on a Roku, a Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app. Watch Action News live,
And the big story on Action News.
plus special programming, breaking news, and severe weather updates.
Tremendous amounts of rain.
Always on, always the news team you trust. Watch 6ABC 24/7 on your streaming device. Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Labor and Energy Show on the Jacob Media Network. I want to thank our previous guest, Ryan Sisted, who's the executive director of Better in Our Backyard. Awesome segment. We talk about having the who's who in the labor and energy community and leadership. And I'm ecstatic to bring into the program Peter Holren, Director of Government Relations U.S. at Enbridge Energy. Peter, how are you, sir? Welcome to the broadcast.
I'm doing great, Joe. Thank you for having me on. And it's good to be back in Philly. Grew up just outside. So
really, where
over in Lancaster, but spent a lot of time in Philly. So
how about that? Well, it's great to have you back in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So today's segment is all about the Line 5 pipeline and the Line 5 pipeline replacement project. And its benefit and the challenges. Peter, if you would, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and Enbridge.
Yeah, so first about Enbridge, what I head up is government relations in the U.S. for Enbridge. And what is not known is, a lot of people think of us as just a pipeline company, but we have assets, energy assets in 40 states across the United States, all up and down the eastern seaboard, across the Midwest, down along the Gulf Coast, and out into Wyoming, Montana, etc. We move about 30% of all the crude oil that moves in the United States on our pipelines. We move approximately 25% of all the natural gas that moves through the United States. And that's not to mention that we also operate one of the largest gas distribution companies in North America, mainly up in Ontario, but it serves close to 4 million people with natural gas coming into their homes. And lastly, Enbridge has under management more than $8 billion worth of renewable energy generation. We're generating or have contracts to generate close to 1.8 gigawatts of power every day. And that's enough power to provide the energy that's needed, the electricity that's needed for 900,000 homes. And so we are a company that, yes, we move oil and gas. That is essential for our economies right now. But we're also looking to the future and looking to that. What does the energy mix for the future look like? And
on the Labor and Energy Show here, and our nonprofit, Advocacy United Energy Education and Awareness Council, that's our whole the whole objective is common sense in energy and working together with our traditional energy sector and our renewable sector to create solutions for the future in the United States and across the land. Okay, unfortunately, we fight an element that thinks you can just shut it, click a switch and transition, and therefore obviously we put ourselves in a hell of a pickle. If you would, so we're going to talk a little bit about Line 5.
Yeah.
Okay. We've covered it before, primarily from a Michigan and Ohio standpoint, but can you refresh our listeners on what Line 5 is?
Yeah, Line 5 is just one of the many pipelines that we operate in North America and across the United States. It originates in Superior, Wisconsin, and it takes light crude, synthetic crude, and also natural gas liquids, which is the foundation for basically propane. From Superior, Wisconsin, all the way across the upper peninsula of Michigan, and then down through Michigan, where it terminates in Sarnia, Ontario. During its travel, it's serving 10 refineries with either those oil products or with the propane products. And so it's providing energy to Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Ontario, and Quebec. 540,000 barrels a day move on this pipeline. That's a lot of oil. And to put it into context, we understand, and your show has touched on it, what happened when Ukraine was invaded and the Russian oil was shut down. The main pipeline that was shut down for crude oil carried about 500,000 barrels of oil, and we saw what that did to the world market. We now have a pipeline that just runs from Sarnia or from Superior, Wisconsin to Sarnia, Ontario, as I said, serving 10 refineries, 540,000 barrels. And we have some government agencies, government individuals trying to shut it down. It just doesn't make any sense, Joe.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Well, first of all, let me, this is not, I want to just get this out of the way. It's a priority. But talk about Enbridge's commitment to, the high standards of doing business, both environmentally and safety wise, on all your projects.
Yeah, Joe, Enbridge had a very bad incident now 13 years ago in Marshall, Michigan. It changed the culture of our company, and we hope that our changes are changing the culture of the industry. Safety is now number one priority. We heard Ryan talk about that earlier, but it absolutely is. Every employee at Enbridge is given a piece of metal, a ring made out of the metal of the pipeline that broke in Marshall, Michigan, and was finally replaced. And we have those on our desks as a reminder of that we will never have that day happen again. We want to make sure that the pipelines are operating safely, but also that we're working with conservation groups and environmentalists on how we can continue to protect the environment.
We had, when we obviously with the Marcellus Shale here in Pennsylvania, the initial standards, there were mistakes made years ago, and those mistakes in environmental situations are acknowledged and remedied at the highest standard. Okay, and so that's to me what's important. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, remembering those incidences and the history is vitally important to making sure they don't happen again. Okay, but it's so important to acknowledge the progress that has been made, so we can, blaze a path into the future. What are some of the challenges that you are facing with the Line 5 replacement project?
So two challenges that we have. The first came actually from the government of Michigan, and the Governor Whitmer, when she was first elected, said that it would be a priority to look at the safety of Line 5 as it crosses the Great Lakes and attempt to shut it down. The Attorney General in Michigan, Dana Nessel, has taken it as a crusade, so to speak, to try to shut down the pipeline. Again, there's nothing there are no safety concerns of Line 5. Line 5 is one of the safest pipelines, has been operating for more than 60 years now. It is one of the most monitored pipelines that we have. We run internal and external inspections of the pipeline on a regular basis, even more frequently than we are required by our federal regulator or even our state regulators. So we know the pipeline is safe. But they are still trying to shut it down. And right now, it's really a lawsuit from the Attorney General that is being pursued that is a threat to the pipeline. We feel we're going to prevail. It's in federal court. We've been successful in all of the pretrial motions that have been taking place. Right now, the Attorney General is trying to move that case back to state court, which she believes would be a more favorable place for her lawsuit. And we'll continue to defend that.
How many of our political leaders, policymakers, this shows about common sense and energy and educating individuals, okay? How many of our, and by the way, a lot of that is the general public, okay? Because and I consider myself a dinner table, a kitchen table environmentalist like everybody else. Everybody cares about the environment, so we don't take it lightly. Having said that, understood nothing about the realities of things and the importance of working together on these things. But how many of our political leaders, our policymakers are prioritizing votes over really just educating themselves? How many of them don't really understand, these issues, and they're just catering to, special interest groups and, to get votes on, instead of understanding the knowledge and the education of what they're actually doing.
Yeah, Joe, it's a great point, and it's an effort that Enbridge and a lot of energy companies are attempting to do, and programs like yours are vital to getting that message out about where does energy come from. I lecture a lot in my job, and I talk to a lot of government officials, and it's astounding how many, especially young people, believe that you just go over to the light switch, you turn it on, and the lights go on, and they have no idea where that electricity came from.
Absolutely.
Or if you pull into your local gas station, you take the pump out, you put it in your car, and you get gasoline. But where did it come from? And not to mention, as you mentioned earlier in your segment, the hundreds of products that we get from hydrocarbons and from petroleum products. There's just a lack of knowledge of where our supply chains are and what they mean. Interestingly enough, we do a lot of Enbridge has done a lot of polling in Michigan and Wisconsin, the upper Midwest. 70% of all Michiganders support the solutions that Enbridge has put forward to keep the pipeline operating, to keep it safe, protect the Great Lakes. We proposed building a tunnel under the Great Lakes that will remove the oil, remove the pipeline from the water, put it safely in the bedrock below the Great Lakes and move forward. 70% of Michiganders support that. And when we talk to a lot of our elected officials, they're starting to understand it. I think there's support there for that type of solution, creative ideas.
And it's so important because, by the way, it's not really difficult to educate the public, okay, on these issues. They just don't hear them enough. Make no mistake about it. We all care about the environment. We don't take it lightly. But one of the most confusing things is we have the highest environmental standards when it comes to our energy sector on the planet, and we're willing to shut ourselves down and do business and import products from our sworn enemies, whether they're our sworn enemies or not. The fact of the matter is that overseas, their environmental standards and their work standards and their work efficiency is nowhere near what ours is. So we shut them down, we shut ourselves down, and then we import the same products. And we need to get the general public and our political leaders to understand, because, by the way, I was educated, just like I hope our listeners are getting educated, that, you need both environment. Or a lot of our labor leaders, our labor communities in the energy sector. It's not just about jobs. It's about the environment and energy security for not just us, but the whole world. One of the things I wanted to touch base on is the Bad River Band. What has been their objection to the current portion of the Line 5 that has passed either through or near their reservation? And for people that don't understand, the Bad River Band is a federally recognized tribe in Wisconsin. What's the situation there? Peter, can you hear me? Let me see. I think we have. Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay. I'm back, Joe. I lost you there for a second, but I think you were asking about the Bad River Band.
Right.
And it's a challenge that we're having, and we've been trying to work with the leaders of the Bad River Reservation for a number of years. A pipeline, Line 5, when it originates out of Superior, Wisconsin, does go across the reservation for some 40 miles or so. We have easements that were negotiated years ago to operate on parcels of land across their reservation. And unfortunately, we were unable to renew those easements on 12 parcels, 12 individual parcels. And because of that, the Bad River Band has said that we are in trespass and took us to federal court to remove our pipelines from their reservation. Just recently, a federal judge out in Wisconsin has ruled that we are in trespass and that we do need to remove the pipeline within 3 years. Now, Enbridge will challenge. We don't believe that the ruling was fully accurate, and we are planning to appeal. But we also, 3 years ago, started a project to relocate the pipeline around the reservation. to listen to the reservation leaders, the Bad River leaders, and say, okay, we'll get the pipeline off of your reservation. That is held up. You were talking earlier with Ryan about permitting. 3 years ago we proposed this project. It's not a big project in relative terms. It's less than 100 miles, and yet we're still waiting for state permits. We're still waiting for federal permits. And ironically, the Bad River Band is actually opposing the relocation project. And so what they are actually have said and have been very clear about it, they just want the pipeline shut down. They want to impact millions of people across the upper Midwest, as we discussed, by the shutdown of the pipeline. We understand, we are listening. We want to do what's right by the Bad River Band, but we also have to do right by the tens of millions of people that depend on that pipeline every day for energy.
And the project is a replacement project, right? In other words, you're making it more efficient. Now, look, I agree with you. That clearly should be respected, and certainly, that's a fact. But you're doing replacement work to make it more efficient, correct?
Yeah, what you would be doing is replacing the 40 miles of pipeline that goes across the Bad River Reservation with a relocation project that will be just to the south of the reservation. And there are some issues about the watershed that we're in, but today's technologies and the labor that we enjoy in this country, with whether it's the pipe fitters or the laborers, the operating engineers, teamsters. I just named all the pipe trades that we work with every day. That pipe is going to be to state of the art, the 21st century standards, and it's going to be safe. And so, we believe that this is the right solution to honor what the Bad River Band is asking, and to continue to supply the energy that is needed for tens of millions of people across the upper Midwest and Eastern Canada.
When we talked a little bit about the permitting and obviously that's the only bill and all those things. We only have a couple minutes left, but tell me how those communications. I mean, when you have those conversations with the Bad River Band and their leadership, what is that environment like? Speaking, no pun intended. What is that dialogue like? Is there any? Are people listening to what you're saying in regards to all their concerns?
Well, we certainly would be hopeful for a negotiated settlement on this. We don't want a court deciding what's going to happen at the end, and we believe there is a solution that can be garnered between the two parties, between Enbridge and the Bad River Band, and we're willing to continue to talk with the leadership of the band and with the people of Bad River if they so choose. It has been frustrating, Joe. We have proposed many solutions. We're dealing with an erosion issue on the Bad River itself that we need to address to keep the pipeline safe and operating. And the Bad River Band has chosen not to allow us to address those erosion issues, and yet they call it out as a safety concern. So it's a little bit of that challenge that we're facing right now, but we're going to stay at it. We're committed to not only protecting the environment, respecting the wishes of the Bad River tribe or band, and also providing the energy that's necessary.
Peter, we have about 30 seconds left. What can listeners do, to get engaged in that situation in regards to support, the process and again, respecting the Bad River Band. But what can listeners do who are listening to the broadcast and want to help?
Yeah, it's a basic thing, Joe. It's a national issue. As we said, shutting down one pipeline strains the whole system. It's going to have impacts. We saw that on the East Coast when the Colonial Pipeline was hit with a cyber attack a couple years ago, and gasoline was at a shortage all through our region and up into Philadelphia. That's the impacts that we're going to have across the country. There is going to be markets will adjust. It's a matter of how long and at what cost. And so people need to get themselves educated. They need to talk to their elected officials. They need to say, hey, we need all of the above. We need to protect the environment. We need to push the transition to renewables and low carbon energy. But we also need fossil fuels today to keep our economies going. We can't have pipelines shut down for reasons such as what the Bad River is saying. There are solutions that can, we talk about the power of and. Let's look for solutions that talk about and. We can protect the environment and provide energy.
Peter Holran, Director of Governmental Relations, U.S. at Enbridge Energy. Really appreciate your time. The answer is education. That's what people can do. They can listen, educate themselves, and come up with a positive solution. I love that, the power of and. Appreciate your time, sir. Look forward to having you back on.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. We'll have more from the Labor and Energy Show in just a minute.
Is the best vacation one that you find or one you get lost in? One that takes you to new heights or reminds you to go with the flow? To get your feet wet and your wheels spinning? One that lets you find your own rhythm or get carried away? Find the best of yourself. Get lost in the woods. Plan your stay in the Wildwoods today.
Do you stream on a Roku, a Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app. Watch Action News live,
And the big story on Action News.
plus special programming, breaking news, and severe weather updates.
Tremendous amounts of rain.
Always on, always the news team you trust. Watch 6ABC 24/7 on your streaming device. Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
Back here on the Labor and Energy Show with J-Doc and Krausey. We just posted up on our podcast page our program from last week, J-Doc, which was a terrific show. We'll put this week's broadcast up on our podcast page. Just search Labor and Energy on Apple or Spotify, and you'll be able to educate yourself. Good conversation with both guests today. Love the way Peter ended his segment, J-Doc. So many times, and I've said this to you in our post-show conversation, so many times I find myself, because I'm a listener when the interview segments are going on, so I'm consuming the conversation as if it were happening in real time in somebody's living room or somebody's car or on somebody's YouTube screen, and I want to jump through the screen because I still can't find the common sense in some of these fights that are being played out. And the conversation with Peter today was a perfect example of that on the pipeline.
It's amazing, Joe. These companies, okay, and like Peter said, they had a terrible incident years ago, and so they take nothing lightly, a lot of our energy sector organizations and companies. And so they want to be a part of the solution. We absolutely need to work together. We can't just switch push a switch and switch the renewables overnight. Like we said before many times, and a lot of our, there's I can tell you this right now, since we started this broadcast, Joe, and I've been surprised and educated just like you to find that a lot of our energy sector leaders are the most environmental people and looking for solutions to work together. But it seems like there's a common denominator that everybody's facing, and that is a far extreme element that wants to just push a button, shut us all down, and that's just not a realistic approach. It's not. And so it was a pleasure to have Peter Holran on the program and Ryan Sistad. Peter again is the Director of Governmental Relations U.S. at Enbridge Energy, and of course, Ryan Sistad, Executive Director, Better in Our Backyard. Great conversation. And of course, again, I want to, welcome, Chet Thompson of the AFPM onto the Energy Education and Awareness Council board. We've got a great group of leaders, and our labor leaders as well, obviously, working hard to do everything we can to make sure that our country enjoys energy security, our environment is low carbon, and the world has access to these products. So it's
good stuff, really good stuff as we steamroll through the month of August and get ready to transition into what will be a very exciting and very energized, pardon the pun, fall here on the Labor and Energy Show. We thank everybody for tuning in. Again, a reminder, download today's show or any of the previous programs on your favorite destination for a podcast. Just search the Labor and Energy Show, and you'll be able to listen in and get educated as I do every week. Great stuff from you, J. Doc. Again, special thanks to all of our guests and, of course, all of our listeners and viewers across the Jacob Media Network. That's going to do it for this edition of the Labor and Energy Show with J. Doc and Krausey. See you next time, everybody.